Hello, my name is Donna Murphy. I'm from the Braver Angels Film Club, and I'd like to welcome you to our discussion of Trust Me. Joining me are fellow film club leaders Ron McFarland, Ivan Kaysen, and Molly Zeff, along with our participant manager, Liz Weiss. Let's start with a few Braver Angels ground rules. We're here to understand others and to explain our views, not to convince anyone to change their mind. We will take turns, not interrupt others, listen to everyone, open up space for quieter group members, and be respectful. In other words, we bring our best selves to this discussion. And here's our, during the discussion, if you'd like to speak, please raise your electronic hand. You should see it at the bottom of your screen and you click on it to raise it. Now here's our agenda for the evening. We are thrilled to have with us this evening Trust Me producer Rosemary Smith. For the first 10 minutes or so, film club leaders will ask Rosemary questions about the documentary. After that, it's your turn to ask Rosemary questions. And then during the remainder of the event, we will ask you questions about Trust Me and look forward to hearing what you thought about it. So let's start with an introduction of Rosemary Smith. She is the managing director of the Getting Better Foundation and one of the producers of the 2022 documentary, Trust Me. Rosemary believes it's a great time to be alive, although not everyone believes that to be the case. Could media illiteracy be part of the dilemma affecting mental well-being, polarization of communities, racism, anxiety, depression, and suicidology? The Nonpartisan Foundation's mission of building trust through the truth about the positive evolution of human progress supports media and information literacy education and has produced the award-winning documentary Trust Me to bring awareness of what she views as perhaps the most important topic of our time. Welcome, Rosemary. And now I think, Ron, I believe you have the first question.
Yes, thank you, Rosemary, for being here. The first question, obvious question is why did your team decide to make this film? Yeah, and so many. Yeah, why did your team decide to make the film?
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah.
Well, back in 2015, our CEO and the founder of the Getting Better Foundation, Joe Phelps, an optimist, thought, wow, there is so much progress going on. Crime, poverty, famine seem to be on the decline. Life expectancy and lifestyle seems to be on the increase. Why are so many people anxious and depressed and suicidal? So he started collecting good news stories. He had a file folder that we still have. It's in our archives in our library. And started gathering like-minded people who eventually joined us on our advisory board. And these people said, could it be the speed of information since the advent of the internet? And now there's some really bright people and physicians and psychologists and neurologists who are saying, yeah, this thing is addictive. If we look at a chart of social media use and internet use since its advent, we'll see an increase also in mental health disorders. So we decided to adopt media literacy as our cause, as our solution. And we looked at the film as being cognitive behavior therapy for the masses. So we went all in. We invested in Hollywood director Rocco Bellic to direct the film. We hired Michael Falavalita of Jurassic Park fame. He was the editor there. And Carrie Davis, who worked on the Batman films. Rocco worked on the Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty films with Tom Shadyac. And we thought, this is it. This is something that we're going to get out before the 2020 election and help the masses make up their own minds on who they should vote for and how, they should think critically to empower themselves. So we kind of look at the film as a way to build peace, lessen polarization, build trust. When people trust one another, they tend to help one another more. They don't see race, color, religion, creed. They actually consider other opinions more open.
Outstanding, Rosemary. Yeah. Wow. I think my second question is which is kind of like a subset of that question. Why did you feel you needed to focus on intersection of human nature and information technology? That's what was the need for that one? The intersection of
Oh,
human
our
nature.
description in our synopsis, yeah.
Yeah.
Because our journalists, our psychologists, and our neurologists on our advisory board, and other experts that we've enlisted, like you might have seen in the film, explain to us that human nature is, fight or flight. We have an innate survival mechanism. We're hardwired to be wary, and we have to kind of work hard to overcome that. It's not second nature. So we need those skills, which may or may not be taught in some of our schools. Some of our schools are teaching those skills. Some of them rural areas, Native American reservations, some of the less populated or, with a smaller tax base, those schools might not get those skills. So we think it's important now that we should all have access to this internet, to this technology, that we learn how to use it.
Okay. So it wasn't based on something like, I just finished a book by Jonathan Haidt, and it was like evolution. Was it kind of similar, but he wrote it as he had a research. Is it similar to something like that? Or, the nature part, it intrigues me. So
I haven't read his book, but I read his recent article.
Okay.
I think he's spot on from what we're trying to accomplish as well. I think when we have these skills, we can consider other opinions.
Okay. All right.
Look less at our differences.
Yeah. Sort of like the Braver Angel way, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think I got one more question. Let me see. Describe the process of finding human stories. The process. How did that and experts to tell their story? Yeah, I like that. I'm curious about that. Yeah.
Well, we had this wealth of experts, and 5 years ago when we started this project, we were hard pressed to find others doing work in this sphere. Oh, there's hundreds. We go to these conferences, these webinars, hundreds and thousands of people that are like-minded, that are working in media literacy, civics, whatever you want to call it, braver angels. Now seeing the effects. When we started researching stories, when I first came to work at this Getting Better Foundation, I said to the CEO, what about we raised 4 kids, they're now all 20s and 30-year-olds, survived adolescence, but barely. I mean, literally barely. This had an effect on them.
Okay.
And it had an effect on their peers.
Okay.
Had 2 of our sons were pallbearers when they were 15 years old.
Wow.
There's some serious repercussions. And Joe said, I didn't even think about this suicide, the adolescent suicides escalating.
Yeah.
And he said, I was thinking more like, lawnmower parents, their parents. They're not letting their kids out of their sight. Their kids aren't learning to grow, to learn to play outside and get hurt and learn not to jump off fences anymore because it hurts when you land on your knee.
Exactly.
So yeah, we didn't have a lack of stories. We started doing research, and really we used the same technology, Google, find out crises because of misinformation, and hundreds.
Okay.
We have 40 hours of footage where we film these stories all over the world.
Oh my goodness. Hmm.
So we had to narrow, the trouble was narrowing it down to an hour and a half, right?
Yeah.
That you would watch.
Yeah, yeah.
Those stories that would engage your empathy, that would make you cry, make you laugh. And
Right.
then we could bring those experts in, like our advisory board, and explain why people fall for these things, why our brains are wired that
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
and then provide hope and point the way to a positive future.
Man, that's interesting because I read a book called iGen, and it talked about lawnmower parents and that
Oh.
type of thing. So, wow, you know, you're sending me on a book tour. So to speak.
Good.
All right. So the next person will be Ivan. You're up, Ivan.
Yeah. All right. Hi, Rosemary. I'm Ivan.
Ivan.
I'm joining from Hawaii. My question is about when you were doing research about manipulation and misinformation. What was your biggest surprise, you and your team?
Ooh.
There must have been a lot of material.
It's a lot of material. To say a biggest, let me give you one.
Okay.
We were surprised that people were surprised about real repercussions from from mis and disinformation. One of my favorite screenings we did was in Europe, in Thessaloniki, Greece, with journalism students from all over Europe. These are smart kids. These are kids who had 4 years of undergraduate college education, and they were now taking master's courses in journalism. They had a lot of media literacy training. And ironically, they had questions after the screening of the film, and they said, we had no idea. There was some crying. We had no idea until we saw this film that there were real repercussions. We thought, people who fall for fake news, what kind of dummies are they? If they do, what's the big deal? They get bullied. They had, they fell for a little something online and they shared it and, they got made fun of. What's the big deal? Really? There's foreign interference in democracy. Democracy is at risk. Really? People almost lost their son because of anti-vax information. Really? Somebody got lynched because of misinformation on WhatsApp? They were incredulous. They just couldn't believe that there were these real. That's what surprises me the most, is that people don't realize the risks.
What about suicides? Was that a big deal when you started off?
Yeah. Yeah. Because
that's just about when it was taking off, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we did a little private case study. We live in Montana, and Montana is ranked #1 in terms of suicide in the nation, percentage-wise.
Right.
We had escalating rates of adolescents, veterans, farmers and ranchers who are very distanced from each other. And we were like, what is the problem? What is going on here? There's so many research, there's so much research going into this. Is it the Rocky Mountain front? Is it elevation? Is it lack of resources? Is it the rural nature of our communities? But there is a correlation to mis and disinformation. So it was very personal. At the time when we filmed, we were hard pressed to find a physician to admit that there's a correlation. Robert Lustig, who's an endocrinologist, says it's as addictive. Social media is as addictive to an adolescent brain as sugar, as heroin, as cigarettes, and substance abuse. So now doctors, there's another group out of the Northeast, and Molly, you might know of him. It's the They're in Boston. They're based at it's the Children's Hospital there. They're doing extensive work in this area.
Okay, I guess it's my time to hand it over to Donna for the next question. Thanks a lot,
Okay.
Rosemary.
Thank you, Ivan. Rosemary, the U.S. State Department has been showing your film abroad a lot, and we're wondering, why is that, do you think, that they are so interested in film?
We found a little niche when we did that screening in Thessaloniki, Greece. All of a sudden, we started getting some interest. And coincidentally, NATO and the US State Department declared media literacy a strategic defense initiative. They recognized that the war in Ukraine was not just started a year ago, it was decades of online manipulation, decades of language barriers and illicit news coming out of Russia, because they saw this as something they were going to do eventually. They saw an occupation coming. China's been doing it for years. We just hosted screenings throughout Romania for all throughout 2022. So the State Department recognizes it, and through our partners in Europe, we've been able to forge this programming where we screen the film, and then we follow up with educator workshops where we teach the teachers how to instill media literacy and civics in their classrooms, whether it's English, political science, even mathematics and gym, and, you know, to map it throughout the school. It's been having a powerful impact. We've had some case studies now that we're sharing with the Department of Homeland Security, and we're hoping to continue this type of work to empower US children now, as opposed to just, you know, overseas.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's a worldwide problem, but how big a problem it is in other countries depends on how much freedom they have in order to access the internet, and we are quite free. So I'm bravo to you and to supporting the State Department. And now over to you, Ivan. I'm sorry, Molly. Molly, next question.
Sure. So my question is around the topic of your actual work with the foundation. So just wanted to see if you could, you know, just more broadly tell us about the Getting Better Foundation, since it's getting proceeds from the showing of the film.
Since it's getting
Proceeds from the showing of the film. Yeah, just you gave it some background in the lead up on the leaders. We're kind of discussing your work. Would love to hear that, you know, or any more detail you want to offer.
Our CEO, Joe Phelps, was the founder also of the Phelps Agency, which was a hugely successful Los Angeles-based advertising agency who had clients all over the world, like Fender Guitar, Tahiti, Travel Tahiti, City of Hope hospitals. So clients doing good in the world and promoting their good work. So he wanted to continue that. So he founded the Getting Better Foundation. He endowed it with the sale of some of his business and some properties in LA. And that endowment, the $1.5 million, went to the production of film. So that kind of was spent. So all of the licensing, which is primarily, just to back up a little bit, we produced the film. It was released in July of 2020. We actually had all the footage in the can February of 2020, and we all know what happened. So due to the pandemic, we had no theatrical release. There were no movie theaters open. So we did everything virtually for 6 months, won festival awards, and said, you know what, we just don't think the festivals are where it's at because nobody can see it. Nobody wants to go to a movie virtually. So that was then, you know. Now we all watch them on our phones. But So we released the film on New Day Films and Canopy for educational use. We partnered with News Literacy Project and the Knight Foundation to create curriculum and discussion guides, adult discussion guides, collegiate parental discussion guides with value statements. And we thought that we would make up our $1.5 million that way, but so basically everything that we raise from our licensing, our screening fees, or our work with the State Department for grants that we apply for and we receive go toward 100% toward media literacy education. We are a small team. We're all volunteers aside from myself and our bookkeeper, who is just part-time. Our advisory board is all volunteers. Our production crew for the film were paid from the proceeds of foundation, but rightfully so. And yeah, everything from here on out goes toward making the world better.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I just want to put in there as someone who's also a fellow creative for a living that when you pay your $3.99 on Vimeo and feel like you should get it for free, just remember they invested $1.5 million. All right. So next question, take it away, Ivan.
All right. I guess Ron and I are closing out the Rosemary segment. Rosemary, is there something that you would love to talk about that we haven't asked you about so far?
I always love hearing that question on the 3 Takeaways podcast. It's one of my favorite podcasts. But you all have been so well encompassing. But if there's something that I would love for everyone to take away from today is, share this Braver Angels group, not because they're my host, but wow, the work that they're doing, study it. If you haven't, I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, the authors that they share, Jonathan Haidt, I had not known about until Donna shared his paper with me. Like-minded people coming together. And I think the more we do that and the more we invite people, we think they should know about this. They don't. Don't assume that, that they want to be polarized, that they want to be judgmental. Assume that they're waiting for you to invite them to a meeting like this, that they're waiting for you to invite them and say, hey, have you seen this movie? I just saw it, had a big impact on me. What do you think? Watch it and see what you think. So don't assume that people will get this kind of knowledge. You know it, so share it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I was particularly surprised about your response, getting all these educated people being incredulous at the things that you covered in the movie. And I'll hand it off for the last question for the Rosemary segment to Ron.
Well, I think it was Molly, but I'll say the question. This is, anyway, I think the question is for the audience. What questions do you have that you'd love to ask Rosemary? That's the next question that I see, guys. So if that's not, somebody step in, but I think that'd be appropriate time to do that. So raise your hand and we'll take you. How about, the one is up, wins the prize is Lynn. Unmute yourself.
Hi there.
Hi.
I've always wondered, there's a lot of research that shows that most people are not extreme, and most people dislike the extremes. There's a lot of research showing that, and hate the polarization. We're not so unique here at Braver Angels. We really represent the population. So why doesn't that seems to suggest an excellent business model for media to, go after the largest customer base in the country. People who are not extreme and fed up with the polarization. Why isn't that happening?
From your lips, Len.
What's that?
From your lips to God's ears. I think they're scared. I think they're scared to share their views. I think they're scared that they'll be laughed at, or, we see these extremes picking on people because of their political belief. I mean, that never would have happened in my family growing up. My sisters and brother all had different views than my parents, but they still respected them.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you on that. We have Christian, then we have Lois up next, and then we have one in the chat, and that I'll read. So go ahead, Christian.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Rosemary. My question is, how do you find this film being accepted by both folks that lean left and lean right? Because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I lean a little left, and I'm like, wow, yeah, I was finding myself so engaged, and I was wondering what folks who perhaps lean in a different direction were feeling. What's been your experience?
Question. I'm so glad you brought that up, because when we first started producing the film, there are some of us on our team who lean left and some who lean right. And we made it very clear from the beginning that we couldn't afford to create more polarization when our goal was to bring people together, right? We didn't want to tick off one side or the other. So we agreed not to cover, and even after the film was produced, we had questions in some of our, why didn't you go back and cover the January 6th riots? Why didn't you, or insurrection rather, why didn't you cover COVID more? And you see in the end, we cover COVID a little more positively. We put positive spin where we're clapping for the healthcare workers. Because if we cover COVID as our anti-vax segment instead of tetanus, a librarian in Monroe, Connecticut couldn't show the film. A teacher in Sandusky, Ohio couldn't show the film and have the students go home and say, my teacher says we should get vaccinated. They're fighting over whether or not they should wear masks at this time. And now they're going home, creating polarization at home. Maybe the parents come in and fight with the teacher. Maybe that's not what we want to do. We want to have people make that leap themselves that, oh, tetanus, yeah, we all know, totally preventable, totally get the vaccine, you don't get tetanus, right? Oh, maybe COVID's totally preventable too. Maybe, right? Maybe I should get, and then the threats to democracy. So we didn't really want to be anti-Trump. We didn't want to be anti-Biden. We didn't want to add to the divide. We wanted people to consider, oh, maybe that guy's not so bad. Maybe I could overlook the fact that he's far leaning this direction and consider his research, and maybe we can collaborate to fix the environment. I think he's too far left and he thinks I'm too far right, or vice versa. We can't work together. So the goal is, to have work in that gray area where we overlook our differences. So we chose not to politicize the film, although the right is accused us of being flaming liberals. And believe it or not, the left has accused us of being crazy Republicans with that media literacy agenda.
Right. So you just throw up your hands and say, what a world, huh?
Right.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, up next is Lois, right? There you go, Lois.
Yes, thank you very much. Fantastic film. Fantastic. Thank you. I've, in the last few years, developed an intense interest in evolutionary psychology. And I'm fascinated in your travels. There are people that are much more susceptible to misinformation and other people that more independently minded. Do you have any sense of what's the difference? Or is it just innate? It's just, I'm fascinated by that.
You brought up travels. That's one way to open our eyes to the fact that we're all so much more alike than we could ever imagine. You would love, and maybe Donna, one day we ask Steven Pinker to be one of your guest speakers, because Lois, you would love, if you haven't read some of his work, but Enlightenment Now is one of his more recent books.
I'm reading it right now.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
Sense of Style. He's a linguist psychologist. So he studies, language and how that has evolved to create how we think. And he would say that the more one, and Ron, you would agree with this too, I'm sure, the more one reads, the more one exposes themselves. That's why the hoverer parent thing was such a strong belief of Joe's, to get that out, how we're hurting our kids by not letting them experience life, right? So experiences like those make us braver, make us smarter, make us more aware of dangers, help us learn. And I think it's that evolutionary part of the psychology that you're talking about, that we evolve from our experiences. And if we shut ourselves in a room with a tablet, get that evolutionary part of it.
Oh, it's interesting. Oh, I have a guy, a psychologist professor, and I'm gonna see if he can do a presentation on that. That would be awesome. Anyway,
I'd love to see that.
yeah, he did one on the book, Jonathan Haidt's, so that was a pretty interesting thing. So, Thomas, I'm reading your question or your commentary in the chat. Do you want to say it verbally, or you just want to leave it in the chat for everybody to hear? Put your thumb up, Thomas, if you're, what would you like to do? Otherwise, I'll move on to Susan. All right, Susan, why don't you go next?
Thank you. And I will say, my husband and I, one of us is right and one of us is left, and we both watched this afternoon, and we both loved it. So there was no finger pointing on either side. It was fabulous. It was really wonderful. I have a much less heady question than the previous one. What I can't understand is, so the film talked about freedom of the press, and I worked as a reporter in my early days. And I don't understand why the notion of treating online platforms, whether it's Google or whether it is Facebook, why aren't they held to the same standard? To me, I just keep thinking but it's never really discussed in conversation. So can you help me here?
I am 100% behind you on that. We need to support credible journalists, first of all.
Right.
And that model's going away. My husband owned radio stations for 20 years, him longer. And it was impossible for us to earn a living and to pay employees and to support the communities that we were licensed to serve based on that model. Jeffrey Gettleman explains it a little bit in the film that, it's not his job to report about all the good things and progress going on. It's his job to make us aware of the problems of the world so they can be fixed. It's not journalism to fight over who's right or wrong. It's journalism to bring awareness of issues so that we can solve them. And we're smart people. Once we do embrace that model, we fix things. We create problems and then we fix them. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. They have the money to do it. Right? That's the question of the day. Not only because here's the can of worms. When you start, and California is starting to do this, they just proposed a bill yesterday that says Google, Facebook, you use New York Times and run your ad next to it, you pay New York Times a portion of those proceeds. But what about Rosemary Smith, who posts a story? Now, I'm not a New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, but I post a story about some crime that's happening right outside my door today. And it gets shared on Facebook and it gets utilized by Facebook and they start running ads on it. What about Rosemary Smith? What about my data, my writing that you're using? That's the can of worms, is that we've all become journalists. So do they have pockets deep enough to pay all of us? So I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to address these questions. I think we all recognize the need for credible journalism. And I think we're going to figure out a model. There's some nonprofit models now where foundations, nonprofits buy newspapers, buy radio stations, buy television stations, and then they raise funding to pay journalists. That's one model.
Wow, that is interesting. Wow.
Mhm.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, for this period of answering the questions. Very insightful questions and great response. Man, you made me think. I have a big question mark on my mind now. So anyway, we'll move on to now we'll open it up to the participants. And the first question, is that for you, Molly, or is that Molly? Are you going to say Molly? I see
Yeah.
your name.
Yeah, Molly, why don't you take
You're-
it?
Yep, you got
I
it.
haven't heard
You got
yet.
it. I
Go ahead,
yeah,
Molly.
want to dive in. So we're going to ask everybody more broadly just to get a sense of your initial broad reactions to the film. This is specifically not guided. We usually like to start with some broad reactions, get this out in the beginning. If people need some prompts, I'll give those. But what'd you think? What'd you think? What'd you feel? What'd you hate? What'd you love? Anything? Going once. There we go. Take it away, Paige. You're a brave soul. Start this section off.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of thoughts are going through my head right now, but when the suicide, my younger brothers, I remember him dealing with a very close friend and him going to his funeral. I mean, it was suicide. He was very close with him. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. And I just seeing going through his reactions, and he was 15 at that point. I mean, it was a lot, very visual, and me being older, going through grad school, kind of family studies, knowing that psychological aspect of the media and that instant gratification, the cortisol it was just, I loved it. I love the film. I do lean red, and I do think starting off with the tetanus was very, very smart, because COVID would initially spike my reaction, and I would unfortunately shut it down, because it was just okay, they're going this way with it. Where is it going to go? I mean, I'm still learning. I tend to more ideas lean in the middle of things, but I was raised with a very strong leaning red family. So that would have spiked my interest. So I thought that was a very good point, hearing that reaction, and why it was very thought-provoking that I did think about that when thinking about reactions. And then, yeah, I just loved it. Those still going through my head, but definitely the younger generations, it's it's scary. It's scary to see what's going to happen, but I do think that I want to get the younger generation talking into more similar-minded conversations, just having those conversations first in schools and go from there. So I definitely, the media literacy, I on board with that, and it's not being taught in schools. I was a teacher for 6 months, substituted. It's not, we're just teaching them how to regulate their behaviors because they are the generation I taught 3rd and 4th grade where they don't know how to interact. They're drawing pictures with all of these masks over their faces. And we did have a teacher that was leaning blue, and she had those conversations with COVID and vaccination, and she was talking to me about it on the field. And I'm like, you can't go there. You can't talk about it. We're not getting education from admin. And there's just a huge gray area. And all schools are businesses. It was a charter. So everybody wanted to please the parents. And it was just you can't talk about it. So it was hard. And the children, they need to learn how to regulate their behaviors because the parents that are more my age, 20s and 30s, are, having difficulties because they don't know how to do it either. So thank you for your time and thank you for everything. I really appreciate it. I love it.
That was awesome. Thanks for shouting us out, Paige. That was really powerful. I did see a hand, but he seems to have disappeared. Well, we might jump ahead to Ron's question. Ron, you want to go?
Yeah, this is a basic question. What did you learn from this film? And did anything in the film, well, I think Rosemary addressed it, surprise you? Now we're asking those of you who have watched the film, what did you learn from this film? And did you have a aha moment or anything that came across? I mean, because it's something that you related to, or anyway, think about it, and let's see those hands come up, and then maybe there we go. Is it Christian? Yeah, you're muted, Chris. You're muted, and then we have 2 of them. I'm sorry, but go ahead, Atkins.
Okay, my name is Kirsty and I'm from Pittsburgh, and
Okay.
I am a lifelong learner at the University of Pittsburgh, which is a program for older retired people. And when I was watching the film, I remembered that at least a couple years ago, I had taken a class that had to do with misinformation, and I don't even remember what the title was, but I asked the instructor whether or not there were any countries that had been successful in teaching their population about misinformation. And he said that it was one of the Baltic states. It was either Lithuania or Latvia. And having been a part of the Soviet Union, they were well aware of the tactics that the Soviet Union used to propagandize all their populations. And so when the Soviet Union was dismantled, that country made a national commitment to educate their population about misinformation, to inoculate them against it. And of course, these are much smaller countries than we are. And they had a common experience being a part of the Soviet Union, but that also gave them the energy to say, we're not going to let that happen. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
Thank you. Just a side note, Brave Angels does have a educational media workshop, just to let some of you guys know about that. So anyway, Christian, how about you? Up next. Yeah, there you go.
I thought the thing that was interesting to me is the concept of who says what's misinformation or disinformation seems so challenging to me, because of course we have obviously political divides presenting issues, and then we're even finding down the road that what somebody reported was true is now no longer true, and then there's still, it's like there's no recourse where media is coming back and saying, what we said actually back then was wrong, or this is what's right. And so it kind of creates that further divide because it's still being purported that this thing is true and now it's been debunked. So the concept of that really makes me scared. I mean, I started to feel like any information I get is misinformation. So it makes me, which maybe is a good place to be spending time, is thinking like, oh, both sides are true on some level, but it's really frightening to me, actually. I mean, social media scares me as a general rule, but then to add that on top of it, my flight, fight, freeze response was pretty strong. And that might be a good thing and serve me on some level to examine my entrenched beliefs, because I lean more red. So it's just kind of interesting place to dwell.
Thank you very much. And I think the next question is Molly's.
Yes.
About the,
good.
yeah, go ahead, Molly.
Yeah, so I'm gonna put this in the chat as well. By the way, if anybody ever is reading the chat or has to do something in the background and you miss a question, I usually try to put them in the chat as we say them or right after. So just a question to learn from each other's practices around reacting to media in healthy ways. Have you ever found that one of your, maybe standard, maybe unusual internet information sources was not reliable or trustworthy? And how do you respond to that? For example, did you change how you use the internet or how you seek out news? And in a broader way, like what did it inspire you to do down the line in the future? So it's okay if you're like, I didn't change everything, but here's how I want to. So just think about, I think one of the things that's really beautiful about Braver Angels, as people think about this question and I wait for someone to raise their hands, is that I think it reinforces for me the fact that human beings are infinitely malleable in our beliefs if we choose to be, right? We have to make that decision. And I think Braver Angels is where I've seen that happen again and again, that infinite malleability. And so, yeah, let's hear from you, Len.
Well, the thing I do is I haven't watched television news or news commentary in decades. And it's not for many principled reasons, especially back, 20, 30 years ago. It's just, I didn't like it. And starting one of the things that happened after the 2016 election, aside from the founding of Braver Angels, was that I stopped posting anything political on social media or responding to anything political. And surprisingly, it was mostly Facebook, reacted very quickly. It stopped showing me political posts on social media. Maybe it's because of that, or maybe because many people felt the same as I did at that point after that election. And but in any case, I stopped seeing politics through social media, and I think it's important to read both sides. Somebody here posted allsides.com. That's a way to get different sides and perspectives, and I think they're all fairly good quality, but they're different perspectives: red, blue, and center. So that's what I think is the way to go, because even the best outlets, certainly the New York Times today, can think whatever you think of that. Someone says use Snopes too, but rather than just saying is it true or fake, getting different perspectives will give you a different a view of the facts.
Definitely. Thank you. That was a really great perspective, Len. And I think I saw Thomas, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to make the observation that most of us in this group are older, with a few exceptions, I think. And I think we need to bear in mind that younger generations, as the speaker mentioned, younger generations consume media in different ways that are normal to them, not, newspapers and radio and TV and such. In fact, I recently heard that, I can't remember if it was Gen Z or millennials or both, probably Gen Z gets most of their news from TikTok. And TikTok is mostly short videos about people doing silly things, I think. So I don't know what news they get from that, but that adds to the complexity of trying to figure out forward-thinking solutions to combat misinformation and disinformation. It's a brave new media environment, as you mentioned. Local news, small newspapers are dying out. They can't make money. Their ad revenue used to come from classifieds. All that's online now. So more and more small newspapers are dying. So nobody's covering local communities' politics. So people gravitate to older people gravitate to cable TV propaganda for profit, right? As I call it. But it's a whole new world. So when we think about how to teach media literacy in the 21st century, and maybe the people already doing this have factored this in, but we as consumers and concerned citizens also need to not assume everybody gets their information the same way as we have most of our lives, and to try to understand how different the younger generations are in terms of what they perceive as news, what they perceive as truth, and that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And I also just put out there, I have to be on TikTok for the company I run, but I have learned from a lot of younger people I work with that they do like the educational TikTokers a lot in some cases. And the problem is, who is checking the educational TikTokers who, I'm sure often have no actual credentials. One of these is a friend of mine who's very smart, but is not a scientist and puts out scientific info, for instance, so that's an example of someone who's really educating people and has gone viral, but he is not actually that qualified, even though I love him. I'm going to put out this question one more time just to give someone a chance to think, and then we'll go to the next question. So again, just have you ever found that one of your information sources wasn't reliable, and what was your response? Or were you inspired by this film to do anything in the future down the line? Going once. Going twice. And great, we will move on. Oh, and someone asked if Snopes had ever retracted things. Yeah, I did find some things. Snopes has retracted in the past at least 60 articles that were plagiarized, but that's different. And then another time it's retracted things for other reasons. So yeah, Snopes has definitely been willing to retract its information as well. Yeah, okay, so we are moving on to Donna exploring one of the technological sources of all of this misinformation in our lives. So go for it, Donna.
Yeah, this film had a lot of amazing quotes. One of them that I liked, I'm going to, I'll say the quote and then I'm looking for your reaction to it. Someone said, a cell phone is a slot machine that hijacks people's attention. What's your reaction to that? I mean, the imagery is pretty interesting, a slot machine. But what do you think they meant, and do you agree or disagree? And Paige, you're up.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it kind of goes with the instant gratification that our younger generations are so used to. It's easy. It's easy. They don't know any other way of searching. I know when I was in high school, and I'm 27, but when I was in high school, they taught us the .orgs, which kind of ways to search certain good sources. And when I was just in teaching, there's no talk about, I think the education, we need to figure out how to get some support in for the teachers. And I know it's all said and done over and over and over again in charter schools and public schools, they are businesses, but I just wanted to teach and help these kids. And the school admin, I know it's just one, but made it very, very difficult for that. I paid for everything to set up my own room and I loved it. I was so excited, but there's no assistance and education to the upper management to help, filter these political things that are going on, because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it because it's too difficult. And one reason why I love Braver Angels, and then why we need to start getting more Braver Angels people into the school system. I really think that's going to help educate the parents, because the kids are going to go home to the parents and teach them.
Mhm.
So
And we love you too, Paige. There are educators, there are our Braver Angels who are talking about getting some of our workshops into the high school level. There is a movement there, yeah. Okay, Kristen, what about you?
You know, as I thought about this question, I thought, golly, when I was in high school, if there was something that, you know, I responded to and it just flooded me with people who thought the same thing, and just continued that loop of now, you know, getting further and further down into that echo chamber, I could totally see that as a slot machine that just kind of hooked me and kept pulling me in and pulling me in. I mean, I kind of feel for kids trying to make sense of all that when they're, you know, God, you know, I used to just get bored because it was boring, right? And the things that got me excited were not this kind of like completely feeding this loop. And so yeah, I love that image, and I think it speaks so much to it. And it's like, what's at the base of it that that we can begin to sort of, you know, look at how do you introduce different thoughts and different perspectives in a respectful way, in a way that allows kids and adults to really entertain that just because someone thinks differently, they're not evil or stupid or whatever. So yeah, I thought that slot machine image was really strong, and it just got me thinking, how do you start digging deep into that?
Yeah, that's so true, Kristen. There's these days, there's so many opportunities for our brains, which seem there's something about that human nature that trends toward addiction. So we've got social media to addict us, let alone actual gambling, which is more and more widespread, let alone drugs, and all the amazing, you know, now we're getting flooded with fentanyl. So there's so many opportunities for us to get addicted to things. And that's like a whole nother conversation, is what can we do about our brain, or, you know, how can we compensate for that part of our human nature that loves this addiction? I don't know. Okay, Ron, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment as a former teacher, because there's been some things about teaching media misinformation in schools. And man, I'm kind of like on a seesaw. I mean, I'm like, you know, it's teaching about misinformation and media has both advantages and disadvantages. While it can help the students with critical thinking skills and enhance media literacy and on, and promote a responsible citizenship, you know, because that, as a teacher, I mean, I got thumbs up for that. But it also has the potential of drawbacks, such as political bias, costs, difficulty in keeping up with changing technology, and difficulty in measuring the effectiveness, you know, and I'm like, step up, the first teachers, you know, and that's the parents. And there's a correlation between the breakdown of the family in all groups, and somebody's not doing their job. And we're pouring all this on our poor teachers to, you know, to do everything, you know. And I mean, I know it's great to do that, but sometimes, you know, we need to do it at home. So that's my thing.
Yeah, yeah, you're so right, Ron. But these days, when we see the parents stepping up, sometimes it's to attend school board meetings and then fight with each other. You know, the parents are showing up, and then they're totally polarized, and they make it even harder sometimes.
Well, that's out of fear. That, you know, a lot of times it's out of fear. So, you know, and they just want the best for their kids, and they're fearful somebody's going to teach them something that they don't believe in. So, but, you know, we have to find common ground when that happens.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Tom Brandt, you're up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there's a very profitable media business model known as engagement by enragement.
Mhm.
And I don't want to cast aspersions, but it's been pioneered by right-wing media going back to the 80s. But the left wing has its versions of it. So I won't get into a debate about who's telling the truth more often, but it's similar to social media. The social media platforms, their algorithms, their computer programs that show us what we get. Like the gentleman mentioned earlier, he hasn't been on social media in years and hasn't posted about politics. They stop feeding him stuff about politics because their bottom line is to keep users online as long as possible. Why? Because they can go to the advertisers and see, we have X number of people staying online for X number of hours, so pay us to advertise, right? Everything is driven by that. It's the profit motive and behind social media and journalism increasingly that's getting more and more difficult. Yet we all can be citizen journalists, as someone pointed out, because we all have access to this stuff now. But it kind of creates a Tower of Babel, right? And the human mind is overwhelmed by too much information. I even sympathize with the parents going to the school board meeting. They get way out of hand, I think, and their fears are way out of line. But I understand because they just feel overwhelmed by all this stuff. There's so much new, they don't feel like they control anything anymore. And the media has a role to play in that. And that's what journalism used to serve, the role as information gatekeepers. And now they're viewed as like just politically biased and bought out by something. And there's some truth to that because there's a lot of concentration in big media in terms of the ownership. And so it's a very complicated problem. I mean, understanding that the outlines of that, I think, could help. But bottom line, they make money by triggering our worst instincts, which is a problem. I don't know how we outlaw it. Somebody mentioned Section 230. That's something currently under debate. It comes from a 1996 law called the Communications Decency Act that basically gives social media companies that legally have no responsibility for the content on their platforms. And so people are debating left and right about how to regulate them. And that's playing out as we speak, because everybody left and right both thinks this is a huge problem, and we're all, as we speak, are trying to sort this out. So I sympathize with parents. I agree with Ron. They have some responsibility, but they're trying to figure out this brave new world. We now have deep fakes and artificially intelligent chatbots that sound like real people. And you can take videos and make them look like some famous person and make them look like they're saying something they never would have said. So strap in. It's a brave new world.
It is indeed. I just wanted to highlight something that Colleen said in the chat box. Addiction is just the habitual avoidance of reality. If one wants to stay present in the here and now, they're not drawn toward addictive behavior. And that got me to thinking, is there something about the present that we really want to avoid? Is it worse than the past, than what people were facing in the past? And people were facing some pretty awful stuff in the past too. But it just, I don't know, it seems like there's so many ways to avoid reality now. And even we can go to virtual reality if we want to avoid this reality, let alone all the other addictive ways that we can avoid it. I don't know, it's tough. One more person, we have Lois Edwards.
Thank you. You're talking about learning. It is important to learn critical thinking, but another thing that we need to learn is humility. We need to not think we're always right. Our brains did not evolve to be logical and rational. They evolved to survive. And we need to accept the fact that they are wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Molly, you've got the next question?
I do. And sorry, I accidentally put the wrong thing there, but I did post it early. So we're going to talk about different questions about who and how could regulate media literacy. So starting with the power of the individual, and then we'll go to secondly, after this, we'll go to more broadly governments. And this is all about adults, by the way. These two questions are focused on adults regulating their own intake of information or governments regulating it for them. And keep in mind other institutions already are doing this. This is already happening. Facebook monitors, Twitter monitors, et cetera, Twitter less around Elon Musk, we know that, but keep in mind that this is focused on adults. We will have a couple of questions focused on kids in a moment, since that's a totally different story. So yeah, so is every internet user individually responsible for acquiring media literacy, meaning to know what's, inaccurate, and how to protect ourselves from misinformation? And if we are the ones responsible, if there's no role for government, if you don't believe there should be a role for Facebook, I mean, they're already taking a role in this anyway. I posted a link to their official, one of their policy overviews in the chat up above. How are we supposed to acquire that knowledge? So I'll post that one more time, but basically, are we all responsible individually? And if so, then how? This is about, the power of individual responsibility here. Yeah, go for it, Liz.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to say, sure, as citizens, we have a duty to take responsibility. But in a practical matter, I don't know that there is a way to delve into everything. I mean, in the film, the example of the teacher taking people through, okay, look at what organization posted that, and then look at who pays for that organization, et cetera. I mean, you would not get through your day if you tried to take the time to do that. So somehow, whether it's regulation of what the media dispensers are doing as they process their inputs, or somehow there has to be something beyond just each person has to be a researcher on their own.
Thank you for that perspective. Any other thoughts, whether agreeing or disagreeing or somewhere in the middle? Yeah, go for it, Kristen.
Yeah, the question that comes to my mind is, like, how do we tend to lean towards things that benefit us, right? And so it's really hard to weigh that, because a lot of times I'm going to lean towards something. I'm not going to apply all those filters of media literacy if I'm, acting from my brainstem and not my, the other parts of my brain. It's kind of like what someone said earlier, that, we didn't evolve to be, thoughtful and it's like we evolved to survive. And so if we're really looking at this larger, how do we show up in this world in a way that can create a world of more justice and more equity, we're gonna have to also allow ourselves to realize that we can't always act out of our own interests. And I think that kind of messes with us. And how do we create the kind of filters that allow us to look more broadly? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I'm going to give this one a moment to sit and just add in to what a couple people have said and say, I think there's always going to be some level of individual responsibility, but like our first respondent said, there's no way that all of us have the time or the energy or the knowledge to check everything. So I do think having, left-leaning and right-leaning fact-checking sources is useful. I also think one thing I learned from my mom, and that I've learned from Brave Angels too, is how important it is to look at multiple news sources, not because you even think one is wrong, but because every news source inherently leaves out facts that they don't want to say, right? Like every news source is trying to tell a story. And when you try to tell a certain story, you're inherently leaving out facts that disprove your story, right? So that's one of my reasons that I like to check. I mean, I lean blue, and I like watching clips from Fox News. I like reading Al Jazeera, and I like reading clips from the New York Times and NPR, So I'm going to call Thomas here. Go for it, Thomas.
I just also wanted to add, it's a common misperception, or so it seems to me, based on all the media I consume, that many people don't understand that the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution only applies to what types of speech government is allowed to restrict or regulate. Yet you hear constant cries about big social media platforms, you know, banning this or censoring that as if they're violating the First Amendment. I understand the impulse, but it's logically not true. They're private businesses. People pay directly or indirectly to use them, usually through advertising. They don't pay directly, but they have every right under current law to censor anybody they want. Now, they might get backlash from their customers if they do that, and the customers might go elsewhere. We've seen that happen a lot. Go to different social media sites that'll tell them what they want to hear. You know, but the argument that this is unconstitutional is incorrect.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a good point to look back at the constitutional basis of anything we're talking about too. And Rosemary, our filmmaker, please go for it. Or one of our producers rather.
I was so glad that Thomas brought that up, because I was going to mention who, you know, playing devil's advocate here, who do we want to legislate what we can and cannot say? Our Bill of Rights protect us. And it's one thing to say, oh, we trust our government. We think they have our best interest at heart. We live in the United States of America. It might be pretty easy for us to say that, or maybe not. But what if we are Ukrainian or Russian or Chinese, and our rights have been restricted of what we can say and do? So I think it all comes down to our freedom of expression. And who do we want legislating that? A platform making money off of our freedom of expression? Government who could be tyrannical in nature or democratic in nature, but who, I mean, that Bill of Rights has been around for a long time. They couldn't even foresee, but they were so bright, our founding fathers, they couldn't even foresee the advent of this, but they could foresee historically how media illiteracy led to uprisings and led to political instability. I mean, back then they did. Not to this degree. So we just have to relearn from history, right, Thomas?
Nice. And on that note,
yes and no.
Oh, go for it, Thomas.
Yes, we definitely need to understand history, or you're doomed to repeat it, right, in the bad way. But I was educated. My graduate education was in long-term strategic planning and foresight, and equally necessary is more systematic efforts and ways to anticipate emerging threats and opportunities across the board, and to factor that foresight into better policy making. Because right now we just kind of like, we put fires out, stuff happens to us, then we try to figure out after the fact. It's impossible to predict the future, but it is possible to do better at anticipating possible threats and opportunities. So that plus the understanding history are both necessary, I think.
Thank you. And Ron, we'll keep it brief just because we're going to switch to Ivan for government side of this, but go for it, Ron. You'll be the last one on this question.
Well, I won't say what Thomas said about the First Amendment, but the con of the, you know, of the right of free expression on the internet is that it can lead to hate speech. It can lead to harassment, cyberbullying, which is, you see that. And then it also disinformation, which our whole conversation is about. And so the negative part of it, who's going to regulate that? And so, you know, you got stakeholders, you got the government, you got private ownership. I mean, that's the part of the con part of that First Amendment right on that, because you know, it's you're talking about censorship, and boy, it's a can of worms. So that's brief.
Thank you. I love that. Thank you, Ron. It's a very good point. Cool. Let's shift to Ivan and talk government because we've already gone there anyway. I'll go ahead and put this in the chat for you, Ivan.
All right. Thanks for the handoff. Yeah, we're talking about government now and how difficult it is for individuals to solely be responsible for their literacy. Let's think about government. Is it time for government to regulate internet content? If so, how? And let's talk about different ways that government can get involved. Should government's role be to restrict what companies do, the internet companies? Or should it restrict what users can publish? Or should government restrict what individuals have access to? Now, government is already involved with that Section 230, which shields the internet companies from what they publish on their platform. But is it time for government to get more involved? Anybody?
I would say it's unavoidable, Ivan.
Yeah.
I've been ill recently, but I try to follow the Section 230 debate as it goes on and on. And it's a gnarly problem. It doesn't matter what you think, politically. It's just a very complicated problem. And regulating, whether it should be the government or if you try to incentivize the companies to regulate themselves, we've seen, these social media moguls making these decisions on their own, right? Or they have advisory panels and they make it case by case. Like Facebook is constantly evolving what they let you say and what they don't and when. And that rankles people. They go, I'm an American, I've got free speech. But as I said a moment ago, these big four private companies they can do whatever they want. The First Amendment only applies to what types of speech the government can regulate legally. It has nothing to do with, but as Ron said, we do have laws against hate speech, at least in some states. And so applying all this to the world of social media is the problem of the ages, I guess. I mean, we're dealing with it in real time, and how it will be resolved and when is anybody's guess, in my opinion.
Yeah. If I could editorialize, I think that Section 230 protection should only be for companies that root out all the fake stuff, all the bots. Because my understanding is that
an
the
interesting
bots
idea.
are responsible for most of it.
Yeah, no doubt. That's another good point. A lot of people don't know how much content online is already generated by computers, by bots. It's not real people doing this. And some of it is for propaganda, political propaganda. Some of it is for profit. As I said, they're all the algorithms are programmed in real time. They can tailor what they feed to each user, to each of us, to try to, based on what we've liked before, they'll keep playing, experimenting, trying to keep us engaged. And on a dark side, that's why have conspiracy theories that used to be kind of a fringe thing that only a few people believed in? Why have they suddenly caught fire and they can go global, in a matter of minutes? Is because there's nothing, the algorithm, they'll take a user and if they like this, they'll feed them this, and then they get links on YouTube to videos that are even like more extreme and more controversial and more conspiratorial. And that's how you get people believing in stuff like QAnon, right? And thinking if you tell them they're wrong, that you're part of the problem. So it's a brave new world. But maybe that's a good idea. Just no bots. That should be thought about.
Yeah. Well, let's we're running at the coming to the end of the session, so let's move on to the last another question. Kind of the question of individuals who maybe we are not holding responsible as much, meaning children. Should children be knowledgeable about inaccuracy in information? Primarily, we're talking about social media before they use it. who should be the monitors of that? Anybody want to jump in that one? We're getting to the tough stuff. Molly.
I'll be brief since I know I'm up on 9:30 here, well, Eastern time or 3:30 in Hawaii. So I think that school curricula ought to be required by the government to teach analysis of media sources. And that's all I'll say.
Wow, that's a scary thought, but
I mean, I think the alternative
Boy.
is what's happening now, and it's also scary, though,
well,
right? I mean,
true.
the alternative
No,
is
no
now
doubt.
when people don't have media literacy, and it's not good, you know?
No doubt.
So.
Roy, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the the awful byproduct is that nobody believes anything, right? So I'll tell you right now that my 3 teenagers basically, so I guess the old assumption was that people were basically telling the truth and there were a few liars, and now it's flipped completely over, right? They basically assume that everybody's lying, and maybe the people you know are telling the truth. Like, and it's a very it's a little dystopian at the moment already, like where they just don't think that anything is trustworthy.
Yeah.
And I mean it's run the gamut too. I'll tell you, my mother loves to say that if a politician is talking, they're lying. Like, she just, you know, it's like her, and it's just, we're in this stage where we just don't believe, and it's going to get worse, by the way. I don't know if you've seen, oh, actually you saw in the movie about the fake videos and the you know, fake reality. Like, that is, the ones in the movie are bad. The ones right now are unbelievable, They can make any actor speak any language, and it looks, I mean, it's incredible. They take a regular, American film, and they're speaking Japanese, Spanish, Chinese, like, and you can't tell that it is not their lips moving. So forget what that's going to mean for political speech and whatnot, So we're in a dangerous time. I don't know that I think kids are actually better equipped than we are. Let's put it that way, because they're in this world where they're pretty good at assessing stuff, and they're pretty skeptical of everything to a certain extent.
Well, I wish that were true, but all the suicide statistics about kids on social media, that makes me afraid. I also want to throw out this background fact. There is a proposed law in Congress that establishes an age requirement of 16 for social media. So, government is trying to deal with it. It's a terrible problem. Everybody agrees it's a problem, but really everybody's at ends with finding a solution. So, if there's nothing more about that, we're going to shift from how regulation occurs to one of the major reasons why we should regulate: increasing mental health problems, especially among kids, but also among adults. So for that, let's turn to Molly.
Or Donna, actually.
Well, I'm just going to state something as a statement rather than as a question, since we're getting to the end of our time here. We've mentioned Jonathan Haidt a few times. He is on our board of directors. He's a well-respected psychologist out of New York University. And he says that the evidence is now in. He's been tracking long-term use studies for a long time. And that before now, we knew that there was a correlation between social media and the mental illness epidemic in teenage girls. There was a correlation. Now we can say that it is causation. Okay, now we can say that social media, engagement with social media, causes more mental illness among teenage girls. So when other things were dangerous, cars, we insisted there be seat belts in them. We can now say that social media is causing more suicides. That takes us back to some kind of potential government regulation. But so that's a statement. I put the link to his article in the chat a while back. Now, having said that, we're at 9:29. So this might be a good time for Molly to maybe wrap up and tell us about the next selection of the film club.
Yes, I will do so. And I just want to encourage the people, we're one or two hands up at the end. If you want to put your comments in the chat, please go for it. We just want to honor ending by about 9:30. So we are going to watch a film in April called The First Step. And it's about Van Jones, who is a Black liberal. I would even, one side is calling him a progressive Black political activist and commentator, working with Donald Trump and Jared Kushner to increase the rights of prisoners and former felons. And this is really, really astonishing. I can say I've seen most of the film and it totally, totally shocked me. And I wanted everyone I knew to watch it. I didn't know this was happening. So I'm extremely excited to share it. And we'll actually have Lance, who's one of the filmmakers, next month as well, blessing us with his presence the way that you have tonight, Rosemary. So I'll send a quick link around to it. But yeah, just keep an eye out. It's going to be on April 20th. And yeah, and we're excited to have that filmmaker as well. And want to put out there a huge thank you to everyone for sharing your full selves tonight, and to Rosemary for being here. We don't get to have filmmakers a whole lot, and that was really, or producers a whole lot, and that was really awesome. And that's all I've got. Does anyone else have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to finish off with, in the chat, someone said, Braver Angels rocks. And I'm going to say thank you for that, because Braver Angels does rock. And if you are new to this format, we have other networks that you can go to, books, 101s, we have political workshops, we have all kinds. When I say political, polarizing, I mean, depolarizing, I'm sorry. And then, just go to braverangels.org, and for a small $1 a month, you could become a Braver Angels member, or you can just join in and free. I mean, it's optional, but take the advantage and get more and come to it. And so you're part of the voice, you're part of the narrative, and we need more voices, especially, and I'm going to put this out there, especially on the red side. Take a chance, and others as well. If you call yourself a other, a purple, or independent, or that type of thing, we need your voice. And that's it. And have a nice evening.